Right folks, what we're going to discuss today is your pre-ride checks. That is an extensive list, but basically, do you want to see my gorgeous face? Of course you do. Hi. Right, pre-ride checks. One thing I've noticed with the channel and some of the stuff I put on the forums is that there's a lot of people that are actually new to motorbikes, and in some countries you can get straight on 1000cc and then go and do your test. Like America, I think America, you can buy any bike you like and then you go and do, your test. So some people are new to bikes, some people are new to Japanese bikes, but these pre-ride checks, and this is by no means gospel, but this is the basic that you should be doing. So, enough of my handsome face. Right, you can go from the front to the back of the bike, doesn't matter. First thing, tyres. Correct inflation and condition. Make sure obviously there's no cuts, no foreign objects in the tyres, and they're at the correct pressure. Usually on a Japanese bike you will have an information sticker somewhere on the bike. It's usually behind a side panel or under the seat, and it will tell you basic stuff like tyre pressures, fuel capacity, the correct grade of oil, etc. So there's always look for that. If you're struggling to find the correct pressures, and people argue about tyre pressures all the time on forums, go to the tyre manufacturer's website, put your machine in, and they will have their recommended pressures for their tyre. To be quite honest, it's the best way to do it. But it does all depend how you ride, what you weigh, whether you ride the bike loaded, etc, etc. I do believe the ZX is something like 36 front, 41, 42 rear, but each tyre will be different, so always check. But like I say, tyres, general condition. While you're at the front, look at the suspension. Are there any leaks? Are the fork seals good? Are the bolts tight for the axle, etc.? There's no obvious grooving of the disc or warpage. You'll feel warpage when you ride. When you brake, you'll get a pulse through the lever, and that means your brake discs are warped. Again, hose condition and all this lot. There's no nicks or tears if you're on the original rubber hoses. Obviously there's no bulging or anything like that, because old rubber tends to expand. Brake pads, have you got enough material, etc, etc. A lot of these you will not do on a, like a daily pre-ride. If you use your bike 2 or 3 times a week, you'll get to know the condition of it anyway. But usually once a week, once a month, whatever it is, depends on how frequently you ride, just give your bike like a mini inspection, and then it's either good or bad. But a lot of it can be felt through the ride anyway. Right, so that's tyres. That basically covers tyres. Wheels, the condition of the wheels. Most Japanese bikes, the cast aluminium. We've just made a new metal, folks. Cast aluminium, and usually they're pretty good. I have known them crack and stuff like that. I don't know what, hang on, I'm just adjusting something on the phone. Didn't realise I was actually moving it. If it was quality, it wouldn't be me, would it? So wheels, basically the same rules go for wheels as tyres. Check for damage. When you do a proper jet, you can always check for run out and stuff like that. If you're on spokes, always check for loose spokes or broken spokes. If you're on a ride out and you break a spoke and all that lot, it is not the end of the world. You can usually continue to ride, but get it repaired very quickly, because it can warp the wheel. Obviously it cracks in alloys, they can be welded and stuff like that. But say if you bought a used bike and there's a crack in it, generally you can get it repaired and stuff like that. So condition of the wheels. While you're there, look at where the axle shaft goes through into the bearings. If you can get the wheels off the ground and give them a roll, you'll hear the bearings, and
a good bearing will sound uniform, and by that all you'll hear is the wheel rotating. If you hear any gritty noises, or you have tight spots, or there's play in the wheel from side to side, chances are the bearings are shot and you'll need to replace them. But also you need to look for any grease escaping out the seals and stuff as well, because that can get on the brakes. Right, next thing, well, we've just mentioned brakes. Brakes, operation and adjustment. Correct fluid level in the reservoir if you're running hydraulic brakes. Correct adjustment at the lever and the hubs if you're running a cable brake. Do they work? You know, give them a pump and a what have you before you start. The pivot, there's nearly always, on a Japanese bike, there's nearly always like a 10mm nut underneath the pivot. Make sure the pivot's lubricated. The lever returns, that's critical. But make sure the nut under the pivot is tight as well. I have had levers fall off. It's not a great feeling. You know, it happens to the best of us. Well, I'm not saying I'm the best. Right, so brakes. So it's, again, condition and operation. Don't forget to check the rear brake pedal, the operation of the rear brake pedal. If it's a fared in bike, remove the cover, check the fluid level in the reservoir. Check for leaks around the hose. Check for leaks on the caliper. Stuff like that. Disc condition. Japanese bikes, in fact any bike with disc brakes, they can crack. And usually you'll get a crack between the drillings and it will go all the way. Some bikes are known for it, ZX10s especially. I have known them go at the mounting bolts and go as well. It's just something to keep an eye on. You will form your own system of doing things and checking things. Some people like to go front to back, like a pilot checking his aircraft. Some people do system by system, and you know, they have acronyms for it and all sorts. You will find a system that you are comfortable with. But basic is, you know, tyre condition, do your lights work? It's the basic stuff, the stuff that you are going to use every single time you ride, you check. So tyres, lights, all that stuff, fuel, oil level, coolant level, all the basic stuff. This is a bit more in depth. So, controls, levers, we've mentioned the pivots, condition of the levers, are the adjustments correct, are the free play correct? On a hydraulic system, free play is pretty much automatic. On a cable system, there will be a required amount of free play, so that, for example, when you're turning the handlebars, you don't rev the throttle, you don't apply the brakes. So there has to be enough free play to compensate for that. Cables, good condition. Are the cables in a good condition? This includes speedo cables and tachometer cables if your bike has them fitted. So like the speedo cable actually goes in on this, in the back of the clocks, goes down and attaches to the speedo drive in the front wheel hub. The majority of Japanese bikes are like that. Some have, like Mrs. Shed's, her Honda speedo cable actually goes to the sprocket drive, and there is a gear inside there which takes its drive off the sprocket. There's like a little push drive in there, so you know it's all the same. So cables and hoses, the condition of hoses. Are there any cuts, bulges? Is the routing correct? Are they pinching anywhere, like around the headstock or anything like that? Throttle, does it return? Because for an MOT or your state inspection, it must do this. Yeah, I hope it does it now. It must snap back. That is a safety feature. And on this bike has two cables. Most big Japanese bikes have two cables if they're running carburetors. One to pull the butterfly open in the carburetor, and one to physically return it. So it's under spring load anyway, but it also has, some bikes have another cable to physically help close it as well. So we've got free play on the throttle there, and you also can adjust free play down at the carburetors whenever you've got the tank off. But again, cable's lubricated or the cable's clean, are there no fraying of the ends, etc, etc. Your eye will tell you if they're good or not. Even somebody new to motorcycles will be able to identify something like a bad cable, because it's fairly obvious. If you've got a frayed end, you know, the worst that can happen is like your throttle will stick open or your clutch will stick open, something like that, if you've got a cable operated clutch. And it can be quite frightening when it happens. If you get a throttle stick open, kill the bike, just kill it straight away, pull over, sort it out. Quite often you can actually effect a repair at the side of the road. So a lot of people with older bikes carry cable repair kits for exactly that. I just recommend replacing the cables every few years. Just get some new ones and then you know they're good. There is an argument with cable lubrication too. New cables tend to have a weather seal either end. There'll be a little rubber boot, and they also contain like a nylon sleeve inside, and are either not lubricated because there's silicone in the sleeve, or they're pre-lubricated. So you know, you don't need to go drowning them in oil. Some products will damage that lining and cause it to swell. There are proper dedicated cable lubricants. If in doubt, ask your local bike shop. Right, so that's throttle. If you have a bike with a fly-by-wire throttle, which a lot of new bikes are doing away with cables completely. If you don't have the correct amount of play in a fly-by-wire throttle, it can mean that the throttle position sensor is bad, and it will only, you know, restore operation if you replace the throttle position sensor. So that's just something to be wary of. Right, lights, are they all working? Are the lenses all clean? So you'd be surprised how many times unknowingly your brake light has probably saved your life. So make sure it's working. Motorcycles by their nature are a harsh environment for a bulb to operate in, because there's a lot of vibration, you know, stuff like that. You'll go through a lot more bulbs on a motorcycle than you will on a car usually. So headlight, is the high and low beam working? Is the lens in good condition? No cracks, there's no water in them, etc, etc. The switch gear, the light switch gear, does it all work? Does the flasher switch work? Do the turning signals work? It's basic stuff like that. I mean, to a lot of you this is just going to be, why the hell is he telling us this? But a lot of us also forget. We do forget to do these things. I know a lot of people that just get straight on the bikes and go, don't even look at the tyres. Right, so electrics, this is an easy one. Condition of the electrics, check the fluid level in your battery. If you've got like a lead acid battery and you need to look at the level, look at that. You can always stick a multimeter on it, make sure it's got over 12 volts in it. Charging system, easiest way to check a charging system if you don't have a multimeter is to start the bike, put the headlight on so it's shining against something, and just rev the bike a little bit. It should go brighter. That shows you that the charging system is working. Right, the fluid in the battery level we've just covered. Make sure it's got the correct fluid level. The loom condition, while you're in there, have a look for any fraying of the loom, general condition of the connectors, etc. And another thing to check with the batteries and the electrics too is the condition of the battery terminals. Make sure there's no corrosion on them, stuff like that, and that the terminals are tight. Right, oil, correct level for a start. Most Japanese bikes have a sight window at the side, as Nibbler does. Look, I'm going to take you down here. So there you go, you can probably, can you see it? Oh, I don't know. I don't know if you can actually. There he is. This is the oil level on Nibbler, and there is 2 cast marks for upper and lower. So make sure you've got enough oil in the bike, obviously. A quick look on the floor will tell you generally if you've got an oil leak, but just have a look around the engine casings, etc., for any leaks. A lot of leaks that you get on a motorbike are, they're generally minor. There's something like you know, something like a rocker cover gasket or something like that. Usually they're not terminally bad on a Japanese bike. If you do have bad oil leak, you have problems. Like the leak we had on Nibbler was a missing O-ring. I mean, what kind of knobhead did that? So oil level, etc, etc, you know, that's self-explanatory. Do not ever overfill it. Generally it gets blown into the airbox and then you end up burning it, but you end up with oil in the airbox and shit like that. If you've got a shaft drive, check the shaft oil level, etc. That's another one. Harley Davidson's, obviously they have separate oil systems for the engine, for the drive line and for the gearbox. So that's 3 sets of oil you've got to check on the Harley, and also the oil capacity in the oil tank. Coolant, same sort of checks for the coolant as there are for oil. Under Nibbler, his radiator cap is under here, but at the side, I don't know whether I'm going to get you in actually, whether you'll see it, but this is the reservoir, posh word, and there is 2 lines on it for upper and lower mark. Tyre pressures, oil level, coolant level are all checked cold ideally, especially tyres. Some machines will have a hot level on the coolant and a cold level on the coolant, but it is rare. Chassis, quick chassis inspection, just look at the condition of the frame and the swing arm, the forks, etc. Just make sure they're all good. If you can, get the bike on a main stand and check the swing arm bearings by moving the swing arm side to side. Very, very little play is allowable. In fact, some bikes from new have play. GPZ900 for one. I have failed an MOT with a GPZ900 because it had swing arm play, and I had to go and take the Kawasaki service manual into the guy and say, look, this is the play it should have from new, that is normal, and he passed the bike. So loose nuts, bolts, etc. around the chassis, is there any chipped or flaking paint, etc., which you didn't notice before? Sometimes, for example, on welds and stuff like that, if there is chipped or flaking paint on a weld, it can be a sign that there's some structural flexibility there, or you may have something that's failing. Obviously it's a lot easier to check a clean bike as well, so that's one reason to keep them clean. Not immaculate, just not plastered in shite. Right, suspension, again, front forks, rear shock, check for leaks, check for operation. Get on the bike, bounce the forks, bounce the rear, check for the operation. This is something you'll naturally feel during a ride anyway. You'll know if something's off. Head bearings. If you get a knocking noise under braking from the front end, and you know, you'll start to brake and you'll hear a clunk from the front. It'll do it every time you brake, every time you accelerate. It's because the head bearings, and they're all adjustable, are either worn out or they're misadjusted or they've dried out and need repacking with grease. It entails taking the top yoke off, taking the whole front end off, because there's a set at the top and a set at the bottom. If you are unsure and the bike's new to you, replace them. Pack them with grease and replace them. Taper roller are better than plain. Kits are widely available for nearly all Japanese bikes because bearings tend to be common sizes. If you're struggling, go to your local bearing factors or your motor factors and see if they can match the bearing up with the number that's on it. But that's a largely ignored thing, is head bearings. Nibblers are okay, they're all greased up and what have you, and there's no knocks, and I've also tensioned the nut correctly, so that's all good. But that's just one thing to watch, because they do wear, especially if you're a bit of a wheelie merchant. You'll go through head bearings like nobody's business. Chain, correct adjustment. I mean, Nibbler's got a cam adjuster, which is not too common on a bike, but this is Nibbler's chain adjuster here, and it's a cam wheel, which is really easy because you just undo these. You need to undo a torque arm on the brake to allow the brake to move, and you remove one of these clips. There's one on either side. Just loosen the axle slightly, and then you can alter the chain tension. Now Nibblers is correct at the moment. Basically, a lot of the manuals will tell you put like a 10 kilo weight on and measure the sag and all this lot. You will know by eye and feel if it's correct. There's no need to go forking out for lasers or anything like that to do it. You will pick up the knack of doing it. You can bet if you're on a long journey, like my mate Rob, he's just done something like 2,000 miles. Chances are on a chain bike you'll definitely have to lubricate it, but you will also possibly have to adjust it. You have to lubricate an O-ring chain. Well, you have to lubricate all chains, but all it means by being an O-ring is that the inside of the rollers have an O-ring seal which keeps grease inside the roller. The outside of the chain, of course, will still go dry and rusty and horrible. So that's why we lubricate it. And chain lube is generally revolting stuff. It's better to put it on a hot chain or a warm chain, because the chain lube will thin out and get everywhere. A bit like draining hot oil. That's the reason why oil ideally needs to be hot to drain, because it just takes the crap out because it's thinner. Same applies for chain lube. It just gets everywhere when it's warmer. Numerous ways of doing it. If your bike's got a centre stand, that makes it dead easy. If not, get a friend to pull the bike towards them on the stand, so it's resting in their hip. You should then be able to come around the back, spin the wheel, put your lube on, and you know, if you're travelling, that's perfectly all right. Check the condition and fitment of the chain guard if you've got one, etc. But just a quick look over of the chain, and you know, the links, the sprockets, the teeth. The teeth should be nice. They shouldn't be hooked. Focus, you fuck. They shouldn't have a hooked end or anything like that. These sprockets, they've only got about 200, 250 miles on them, so I know they're good anyway. So that's it, generally for the chain. And you'll know if you've got the chain adjustment wrong, because, or too slack, because the gearbox will generally be an absolute bastard to go into gear or go into neutral, because the correct tension isn't on the sprocket, basically. So that's suspension and chain. Side stand, something a lot of people miss. Side stand, check for general condition. Make sure there's no cracks or anything on it. I have known these to fail, and people have broken legs because of it, because all of a sudden they've got the whole weight of the bike unexpectedly, and I've known somebody's shin bone to go through their leg trying to keep a bike up with when a stand broke on them, and that was a GSXR. Condition of the spring. Make sure the spring is in good condition and it holds the stand in its correct position when it's up, because you don't want the stand breaking. These springs will break, you know, and the tags can break off and stuff like that, and then you have a stand going ding 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 across the road and you think the engine's about to grenade. It's great fun. There's also what they call a lockout switch on a lot of Japanese bikes. I think quite a lot of bikes have them now, and what that switch does is that if you have the stand down and you put the motorcycle in gear, it should stall. It should stall the engine. The offshoot of that is some systems, if you pull the clutch in, it overrides this, so you can actually put the bike into gear with that in. Not all bikes do it, and it's a bit of a stupid thing, but yeah, usually if you're there, you've started the bike up, you know, you've picked it up off the stand, you've clunked it in gear and it stalls, it isn't you, it's usually this. And a lot of starting issues can be due to this switch as well, and the one in the clutch. These switches can go bad if the bike has stood for a long time. Usually a bit of WD in it. If you can get something like WD or Croil or something like that in it, 9 times out of 10 it will cure it. You don't need to buy a new switch. My clutch switch was like that. My clutch switch went bad, and there's a micro switch on the clutch. You'll probably be able to hear it. There it is, it's where that green band is, look. But there's, I don't know whether you can see the pivot. There's the pivot. And that has the same job. That will either stop the bike starting or it will stall the bike. So basically, that's it. Just a look over, a really good look over, I'd say once a month, if you're riding regularly. Because the rest of it, you'll sort of figure out as you go along. Also with a faired bike, security of the fairings is an issue. Are they all tightened down properly? They're not flapping in the breeze, doing one-arm seagull impressions and stuff like that. Same with the screen. Mirrors clean and adjusted properly. Fuel tank. How old is your fuel? Have you got enough to do your journey? Make sure it's not leaking, etc. Don't forget to turn the fuel tap on. We've all done that one. You know, you get, I don't know, a mile up the road and the bike starts. Well, it has the symptom of being starved of fuel, because that's exactly what's happening. And then, like an idiot, you know, you've forgot to turn the fuel tap on. It happens to all of us. And the general is just to look over the bike. Just make sure it's all right. Make sure it's all secure. Stuff like that. Exhaust, is it all mounted correctly? Stuff like that. When you do oil change and stuff like that, you have an opportunity to obviously look at a lot more of it with the fairings removed and stuff like that, or even a naked bike. You've got a great opportunity to just check the condition of exhaust and all your engine fittings and stuff like that. So that's me two penneth. It is not a how-do, it's just the things to look for, but it's common sense at the end of the day, because on a bike, possibly more than any other vehicle, including a push bike, basic stuff like your tyres, your brakes, stuff like that is the stuff that's going to save you bacon at the end of the day, so it needs to be good. So, just a short one, but as usual, I waffled on like a plonker, and I think that will do. Any questions, stick them on the Facebook page. Yes, we've got Facebook now because you asked for it, so it's your own fault. Or you can stick a comment down on the video and we'll get back to you when we see it, basically. So that's it, I'm going. Bye.